The fluorescent lights of the 30th floor hummed a monotonous tune, a sound I had come to associate with the slow draining of my soul. For 8 months, my life had been a cycle of bleach, ammonia, and the quiet erasure of other people's lives. I was a cleaner at Sterling Corporation, a ghost in the machine, visible only by the pristine surfaces I left behind. My son, Leo, was the only thing that wasn't gray in my world. He was a vibrant splash of color, all scraped knees and impossibly bright questions, and he was the reason I scrubbed floors in a gleaming glass tower that pierced the sky like a crystal dagger. We were surviving. It was a word I clung to, a raft in a choppy sea of unpaid bills and threatening letters from our landlord. The job at Sterling paid just enough to keep the water from closing over our heads, but the current was strong, and I was always so tired. Each night, I'd return to our cramped apartment, the smell of industrial cleaner clinging to my clothes, and I'd hold Leo, breathing in the scent of his shampoo and telling myself it was all worth it. That night, the hum of the lights felt different. It felt like a prelude to a storm. I was on the executive floor, a place of hushed carpets and expensive art, where the air itself seemed to carry the weight of billions of dollars. I was polishing the long mahogany table in the main boardroom when I heard the voice. It was a voice that could cut glass, low and sharp and utterly devoid of warmth. That is not an excuse. It is a failure. And I do not tolerate failure. It was Alastair Sterling, the man whose name was on the building, on the letterhead, on the checks that barely kept me afloat. I had only ever seen him in pictures, a severe face with piercing gray eyes and a jaw that looked like it had been carved from granite. He was a legend, a phantom of corporate ruthlessness. I froze, my rag hovering over the polished wood. I was supposed to be gone by now, but a spill in the lower-level cafeteria had set me behind. Peeking through the crack in the boardroom door, I saw him standing over a young man who looked no older than 25. The younger man was pale, his hands trembling slightly as he clutched a tablet. "Mr. Sterling, I assure you, the data was triple-checked. It's a market fluctuation, it's not. It is your job to anticipate fluctuations," Sterling snapped, his voice dropping to a dangerous whisper. "It is your job to be better than the market. You are paid a small fortune to predict, to control, to win. You have done none of those things. You have failed." The word hung in the air, heavy and cruel. The young man flinched as if struck. I saw his shoulders slump, the fight draining out of him completely. My own stomach twisted into a knot. I knew that look. It was the look of someone who had tried their absolute best and was being told it wasn't just not good enough, but that it was a personal defect. Something inside me, something weary and worn down by my own struggles, finally broke. I had spent my life being quiet, making myself small to survive. But seeing that casual cruelty, that dismissal of a person's effort, ignited a spark of defiance I thought had long been extinguished. Before I could stop myself, I pushed the door open and stepped inside. Both men turned to look at me, their expressions a mixture of shock and confusion. Alastair Sterling's gray eyes narrowed, scanning my generic gray uniform, dismissing me in an instant. "What is it?" he demanded, his irritation palpable. My heart hammered against my ribs like a trapped bird. My brain was screaming at me to apologize, to back out of the room, to disappear. But my mouth had other ideas. "He tried," I said, my voice barely a whisper but clear in the silent room. "He's probably been here since dawn and won't see his family until midnight. He's probably missed dinner and a bedtime story. He's giving you his life, and you call it a failure because of something he can't control. That's not leadership. It's just being a bully." The silence that followed was absolute. It was so profound I could hear the blood roaring in my ears. The young man stared at me, his mouth agape. Alastair Sterling's face, however, was a mask of cold fury. He took a slow, deliberate step toward me. He was taller than I had imagined, an imposing column of bespoke tailoring and controlled power. "Who are you?" he asked, the question a shard of ice. "My name is Alara Vance. I'm with the cleaning service." He gave a short, humorless laugh. "You were with the cleaning service." He didn't even raise his voice. He didn't need to. The finality in his tone was enough. He turned his gaze to the young analyst. "You, go home. We will discuss this tomorrow." Then his eyes, like chips of flint, landed back on me. "You, get your things and get out of my building. You are fired." I didn't say another word. I just nodded, a strange sense of calm washing over the terror. I had spoken my truth. It had cost me my job, the very thing that was keeping my son and me from homelessness. But for a single, fleeting moment, I had refused to be invisible. I turned and walked out of the boardroom, feeling the weight of his stare on my back with every step. The walk to the locker room was the longest of my life. The call to the supervisor was brief and humiliating. My final paycheck would be mailed. I was to be escorted from the premises. As I stood on the pavement outside the shimmering tower, the cold night air hitting my face, the reality of what I had done crashed down on me. I had traded our stability for a single moment of defiance. The eviction notice had arrived a week ago. I had been counting on my paycheck to buy us a few more days, a little more time to find a solution. Now, there was no solution. I drove our sputtering, 20-year-old sedan back to the apartment building, my hands shaking on the wheel. The landlord was waiting by the door, his arms crossed. He didn't have to say a word. I just nodded, went inside, and packed our lives into 2 suitcases and a handful of garbage bags. Leo was confused. "Where are we going, Mama?" he asked, his small hand clutching his favorite stuffed bear. "On an adventure." I lied, my voice thick with unshed tears. "We're going to go camping." In the car, his eyes lit up, because he was 6 years old and the world was still a place of magic, not harsh realities. His innocence was a physical pain in my chest. We spent that first night parked in a desolate corner of a Walmart parking lot, the seats of the car digging into our backs. I didn't sleep a wink, my mind racing with a paralyzing fear. I had failed him. My son was homeless because I couldn't keep my mouth shut. The next day was a blur of searching for shelters, only to find they were all full. I used the last of our cash to buy gas and some sandwiches. As night fell again, a cold, miserable rain began to fall. I couldn't bear another night in a brightly lit parking lot, feeling exposed and vulnerable. I drove aimlessly, my mind numb with despair, until I found myself in a familiar part of the city. I pulled into the underground parking garage of the Sterling Corporation Tower. I knew the security guard on the late shift, a kind man named George who sometimes shared his coffee with me. I told him the car was acting up and I was waiting for a tow. He waved me into a visitor's spot, his face full of sympathy. I knew it was a terrible risk, but it was dry and relatively safe. I made a bed for Leo in the back seat, covering him with my coat and every spare piece of clothing we had. He was exhausted and fell asleep quickly, his small face peaceful in the dim garage light. I sat in the driver's seat, watching the rhythmic rise and fall of his chest, my heart a leaden weight. Hours passed. The garage emptied out until only a few vehicles remained in the reserved section. I recognized the sleek, black sedan that belonged to Alistair Sterling. Beside it was another car, a vintage model, covered by a silk sheet. I had been told he kept it here for sentimental reasons, a relic from a different life. It was a strange, human detail for a man who seemed more machine than person. My eyes grew heavy. I must have drifted off, my head slumped against the cold glass of the window. I was woken by a sharp rapping sound. My head snapped up, my heart instantly pounding. A figure was standing outside my car. For a horrifying second, I thought it was security, that we'd been discovered. Then the figure moved into a patch of light, and my blood ran cold. It was Alistair Sterling. He looked as immaculate as he had in the boardroom, his suit uncreased, his hair perfect. But his face was etched with exhaustion, and something else I couldn't read. Confusion? Disbelief? He wasn't looking at me. He was looking into my back seat. At my sleeping son. I scrambled to open the door, my movements clumsy with panic. "Mr. Sterling, I can explain." The car broke down. The lies died on my lips. The situation was too stark, too damning for flimsy excuses. He didn't seem to hear me. His gaze was fixed on Leo. He finally tore his eyes away and looked at me, and for the first time, I saw something other than cold authority in his expression. It was a deep, unsettling shock, as if he had discovered an alternate reality operating in the foundations of his own. "Is that your son?" he asked, his voice low, almost rough. I nodded, unable to speak. I tried to shield Leo from his view with my body, a useless, protective instinct. He looked from the meager collection of our belongings packed into the car to my own pale, terrified face. The pieces were clicking into place for him, and the picture they formed was clearly not one he had anticipated. "You're living in your car," he stated. It wasn't a question. I squared my shoulders, a pathetic attempt at dignity. We're fine. We were just leaving to go where? The question was sharp, direct. It cut through my pretense. I had no answer. The silence stretched, thick with my shame and his stunning realization. He ran a hand over his face, a gesture of profound weariness that momentarily stripped away his formidable aura. He looked human. You lost your home because I fired you, he said, the words heavy with a dawning responsibility. I wanted to deny it, to tell him it was more complicated than that, but I was too tired to lie anymore. I just gave a small, defeated nod. He stood there for what felt like an eternity, the silence of the garage broken only by the hum of the ventilation system. Then he seemed to come to a decision. The mask of the CEO slotted back into place, but the coldness in his eyes was gone, replaced by a steely resolve. Get your son, he said. It was a command. You're coming with me, my mind reeled. What? No, I can't. We can't. This is not a negotiation, Miss Vance, he said, his tone leaving no room for argument. It is below freezing outside. Your son is sleeping in a car in my parking garage. This is happening. Now get him. He walked over to the vintage car, pulled off the silk cover, and unlocked the passenger door. It was an old, beautifully restored Mustang. He had found my son sleeping in his past. Numbly, I did as he said. I gently woke Leo, who blinked sleepily and allowed me to lift him from the car. I carried him over to Sterling's sleek, modern sedan. He shook his head. Not that one. The other 1 inch. He opened the back door of the Mustang, and I carefully placed Leo inside, buckling him in. He was already half asleep again. Sterling took our 2 suitcases from my car and put them in his trunk without a word. Get in, he said, holding the passenger door for me. I hesitated, my mind a storm of fear and confusion. What was he doing? What did he want? Was this pity? Guilt? Some kind of cruel game? I am not going to leave a child to freeze in my garage, he said, his voice softer now, edged with an impatience that seemed directed at himself more than at me. Please, just get in the car. I slid into the leather seat, my worn-out jeans a stark contrast to the immaculate interior. He closed the door, walked around to the driver's side, and started the engine. The powerful rumble filled the quiet garage. He drove us out into the rain-slicked city streets, the windshield wipers keeping a steady, hypnotic rhythm. I had no idea where we were going, only that we were leaving the worst night of my life behind, driven by the man who had caused it. The elevator ride was silent and swift, a smooth ascent into another world. We stepped out directly into his apartment, a penthouse that was less a home and more a vast expanse of glass, steel, and minimalist furniture. It was beautiful and sterile, like a magazine spread. The city lights twinkled below us through floor-to-ceiling windows, a carpet of diamonds laid at our feet. It was the view from the top of the world, and I had never felt smaller. Leo, now fully awake, stared with wide eyes. Wow, he breathed, the word a small puff of wonder in the cavernous space. Alistair Sterling watched him, a flicker of an unreadable emotion in his eyes. He then turned to me. There are 3 guest bedrooms down that hall. Pick one. They all have their own bathrooms. He gestured vaguely to a long, white corridor. I have to make a call. He disappeared into an office, the glass door sliding shut behind him, leaving me and Leo standing awkwardly in the middle of the enormous living room. I felt like an intruder, a stray brought in from the cold. The sheer scale of the place was disorienting. Our old apartment could have fit into this one room 5 times over. I chose the first bedroom in the hall. It was larger than our entire old apartment, dominated by a king-sized bed with a mountain of white pillows. A single, abstract painting hung on the wall, the only splash of color in the otherwise monochromatic room. I helped Leo get ready for bed, my movements stiff and uncertain. He was too excited by the novelty of it all to be scared, peppering me with questions about who Mr. Sterling was and if we were going to live in the Sky Castle now. I tucked him into the impossibly soft bed, and he was asleep in minutes, his small form almost lost in the vastness of the mattress. I stood watching him for a long time, my heart a tangle of gratitude and profound anxiety. We were safe. We were warm. But we were at the mercy of a man I didn't know, a man who had shattered our lives with a single sentence just hours before. When I emerged from the bedroom, Alistair was standing by the windows, looking out at the city. He had taken off his suit jacket and rolled up the sleeves of his white shirt, and the change made him seem slightly less formidable. "He's asleep," I said quietly. He nodded, not turning around. "Good, Mr. Sterling." I began, my voice trembling slightly. "I don't know what to say. Thank you, but we can't stay here. I can't accept this." He finally turned to face me. His gray eyes were shadowed with fatigue. "And what is your alternative, Miss Vance? Back to the car? A shelter, if you can find one with a bed? Let me be clear. I am responsible for your situation. My actions led to you and your son being homeless. Therefore, it is my responsibility to rectify it. This is not charity. It is a correction of an error." His words were as precise and unsentimental as a legal document. He was framing it as a problem to be solved, a ledger to be balanced. It was the only way, I suspected. He knew how to process the messy reality of human consequence. "I can't live here for free," I insisted, clinging to the last shreds of my pride. "I have to work. I can pay you back." He considered this for a moment, his gaze analytical. "Very well. You said you're a cleaner. I am. My housekeeper quit 3 weeks ago. The temp service is unreliable. The position is live-in. It comes with a salary and use of a guest suite. You can start tomorrow. You will be a household manager. You will manage the cleaning, the groceries, the scheduling. Is that acceptable?" It was a proposition, delivered like a business ultimatum. He was offering me a job, a home, a lifeline, all wrapped in the cold, impersonal language of a transaction. It was his way of letting me keep my dignity, of turning this chaotic situation into something structured and manageable for him. My throat was tight. "Yes," I whispered. "Yes, that's acceptable." "Good," he said, the single word closing the negotiation. "Now, you should get some rest. I have an early meeting." He retreated to his own section of the penthouse, and I was left alone again in the silent, sprawling space. I went back to the guest room and slid into the bed next to Leo, pulling the covers up to my chin. The sheets were cool and smelled faintly of lavender. I was in the most luxurious bed I had ever slept in the home of the most powerful man I had ever met, and I had never felt more like an imposter in my own life. I cried silently, not from despair anymore, but from a dizzying mix of relief, confusion, and a terrifying, burgeoning hope. The first few days were a strange, surreal dance of avoidance. Alistair Sterling left before Leo, and I woke up and returned long after I had put Leo to bed. My instructions were left on a tablet on the kitchen counter, lists of tasks, dietary preferences, appointments to schedule. I was the household manager, and he was my employer. We communicated through technology, two ghosts haunting the same magnificent space. I threw myself into the work. I cleaned every surface until it gleamed. I learned the ridiculously complex coffee machine. I stocked the sterile refrigerator with organic food. I organized his closets, where the suits hung in a perfect, somber line, each one costing more than I used to make in a month. I was trying to prove my worth, to earn my keep, to convince both him and myself that I was more than just a problem he was solving. Leo, on the other hand, adapted with the effortless grace of a child. The penthouse was his kingdom. He found a small library filled with books Alistair had never opened and spent hours curled up in an armchair, lost in stories. He was happy. He was safe. And watching him, my own anxieties began to soften at the edges. Alistair observed us from a distance. I would catch him sometimes, standing in the doorway of his office, watching as I helped Leo with a drawing at the kitchen island. His expression was always guarded, analytical, as if he were studying a foreign species. He never spoke, but I could feel his eyes on me, a silent, constant presence. The first crack in the professional facade came a week after we arrived. I was making dinner, a simple chicken soup that filled the large kitchen with a warm, savory aroma. It was the kind of smell the apartment had probably never known. I had assumed, as usual, that he would be working late. He walked in just as I was setting a bowl on the counter for Leo. He stopped, and for a moment, he just breathed in. "What is that smell?" he asked. It wasn't an accusation, but a genuine question. "It's soup," I said, my heart giving a nervous flutter. "I made enough for you, if you want some." "It's on the stove." He hesitated, his internal calculus whirring. Then, to my utter astonishment, he nodded. He sat down at the vast marble island, a few seats away from Leo, and I ladled him a bowl. He ate in silence, his movements precise. Leo, however, had no such compunctions. "Mr. Sterling, Leo said, his mouth full of noodles. My mom makes the best soup. It can cure anything. Alistair looked at Leo, a ghost of a smile touching his lips. It was so fleeting I thought I might have imagined it. Is that so? Yep, Leo said confidently. Even a broken heart. I nearly dropped my spoon. I shot Leo a warning look, but the damage was done. I waited for Alistair to retreat back into his shell, to make an excuse and leave. Instead, he just looked down at his bowl. I'll keep that in mind, he said quietly. After that dinner, the distance began to shrink, millimeter by millimeter. He started coming home earlier. He would sit at the kitchen island while I cooked, sometimes asking quiet questions about my day. He spoke to Leo more, answering his endless stream of questions with surprising patience. I learned that he had grown up in a house just as silent and sterile as this one, raised by nannies and tutors, his parents too busy building an empire to build a family. One night, I found him in the library, staring at the shelves of unread books. He was holding a worn copy of a classic adventure novel. This was my father's, he said, his voice low. He bought entire collections from estate sales. For the aesthetic. I don't think he ever read a single 1-inch. You should read them to Leo, I suggested softly. He'd love that. Alistair looked at me, his gray eyes searching my face. I wouldn't know how. You just open the book and say the words, I said with a small smile. The magic does the rest. The next night, I walked past the library and heard the low murmur of his voice. I peeked in. Leo was curled up at one end of a leather sofa, listening with rapt attention as Alistair, seated awkwardly at the other end, read aloud. His voice was stiff at first, but as I watched, it began to relax, to find the rhythm of the story. A warmth spread through my chest, so intense it almost hurt. I was seeing a side of him I never thought existed. The walls around him were beginning to crumble, brick by painstaking brick. He started sharing small pieces of himself. He told me about the immense pressure he'd been under since he was a boy, groomed to take over the company, his entire life a series of expectations he had to meet. He spoke of a loneliness so profound it had become a part of his personality, a shield he used to keep the world at bay. In turn, I told him about my life. About Leo's father, who had left when I told him I was pregnant. About the years of struggle, working 2 jobs, the constant fear of not being enough. We were from different universes, he and I, but we were both fluent in the language of isolation. The professional dynamic was becoming impossible to maintain. The space between us was no longer empty but charged with an unspoken tension. We were employer and employee, but we were also 2 lonely people who had stumbled into each other's orbits and found a strange sort of gravity. The breaking point came on a rainy Saturday afternoon. Leo was at a friend's birthday party, the first he'd been invited to since we'd moved. The penthouse was quiet, the only sound the drumming of the rain against the vast windows. We were in the kitchen, a comfortable silence between us as I made tea. He was leaning against the counter, watching me. The intensity of his gaze made my hands tremble as I poured the hot water. Alara, he said, his voice a low rumble. It was the first time he had used my first name without a professional title attached. I looked up, and my breath caught in my throat. The guard was completely down. His eyes were dark with an emotion I couldn't misinterpret. He took a step toward me, then another. He gently took the mug from my hands and set it on the counter. Then, he raised his hand and tucked a stray strand of hair behind my ear. His touch was feather-light, but it sent a jolt through my entire body. I haven't felt human in a very long time, he whispered, his thumb stroking my cheek. Until you and Leo came here. This place was a glass box. You've made it a home. My heart was pounding so hard I was sure he could hear it. I couldn't speak. I could only look at him, all my own hidden feelings reflected in his gaze. He leaned in slowly, giving me every chance to pull away. I didn't. I couldn't. When his lips met mine, it wasn't a spark, it was a wildfire. It was hesitant at first, a question. Then, as I leaned into him, it deepened, becoming a desperate, hungry confirmation of everything that had been building between us. It was a kiss that shattered the last of the boundaries, that obliterated the lines between employer and employee, between his world and mine. When we finally broke apart, we were both breathless. He rested his forehead against mine, his eyes closed. This changes everything, he said, his voice rough with emotion. I know, I breathed. And I knew, with a terrifying certainty, that there was no going back. The professional arrangement was a ruin, and in its place, something fragile and beautiful and incredibly dangerous had begun to grow. Our new reality was a secret world built in the quiet hours after Leo was asleep. It was stolen moments in the kitchen, long talks on the balcony overlooking the glittering city, the soft touch of his hand on my back as we passed in the hallway. The penthouse, once a symbol of my displacement, began to feel like a sanctuary. Alistair was a different man with me. The ruthless CEO was replaced by someone gentle, attentive, and surprisingly vulnerable. He was learning how to live, not just exist, and I was falling in love with him. But the world outside our glass tower remained. One evening, Alistair was hosting a small, formal dinner for some of his board members. I was to serve the food catered by a high-end restaurant and then make myself scarce. I played the part of the efficient household manager, my face a neutral mask, my heart aching with the charade. Alistair was polite but distant with me in their presence, the professional wall rebuilt, stronger than ever. It was a necessary performance, but it hurt. As I was clearing the dessert plates, I overheard a snippet of conversation. One of the board members, a hawk-faced man named Davies, was speaking in a low, conspiratorial tone. "I don't know, Alistair. A live-in manager? And with a child? It seems irregular." A potential liability, Alistair's response was cold and immediate. "My domestic arrangements are my own concern, Philip. Mrs. Vance is highly competent." The use of Mrs. Vance was like a slap. I retreated to the kitchen, my hands shaking. It was a stark reminder of our reality. In his world, I was a liability. Our relationship was a secret that could damage him. The next morning, the first stone was thrown. A popular gossip blog published an article. There was a grainy photo of Alistair, Leo, and me in a park over the weekend. We had been laughing, and Alistair had his arm resting on the back of the bench behind me. It was an innocent picture, but the headline was venomous. "Sterling's Mystery Woman, CEO's New Charity Case?" The article was a masterpiece of insinuation. It painted me as a down-on-her-luck opportunist, a fired cleaning lady who had somehow manipulated her way into the billionaire's penthouse. It questioned Alistair's judgment, framing his kindness as a sign of instability. It mentioned Leo, calling him the woman's young son, as if he were a prop in my scheme. I felt sick. The words were a physical assault, twisting our story into something ugly and transactional. I was sitting at the kitchen island, staring at the tablet, when Alistair walked in. He saw my face and immediately knew. He came over and read the article over my shoulder, his jaw tightening with every poisonous word. "I'm so sorry," I whispered, tears blurring my vision. "This is my fault, don't," he said, his voice a low growl. "This is not your fault. This is a targeted leak. This is Philip Davies." He immediately went into crisis mode. The vulnerable man I knew disappeared, replaced by the formidable CEO. He spent the entire day on the phone with his legal and PR teams, his voice sharp and commanding. He was fighting a war, and I was the territory they were fighting over. His immediate reaction was to control the damage, and his method was to shield me. But his shield felt like a cage. "Alara, I think it would be best if you and Leo stayed inside the apartment for a few days," he said that evening, his tone detached and clinical. "No more trips to the park until my team gets this under control. We need to limit your visibility." My heart sank. "You want to hide us. I want to protect you," he corrected, his eyes avoiding mine. "The media will be all over this. They'll try to follow you, to question you. I can't let that happen." It was a logical strategy, but it felt like he was ashamed. It felt like he was putting me and Leo in a box until the unpleasantness passed. The sanctuary was beginning to feel like a gilded prison. The distance he had so carefully dismantled was being rebuilt before my eyes, this time with bricks of strategy and damage control. Over the next few days, the atmosphere in the penthouse grew thick with tension. Alistair was consumed by the fallout. The board was in an uproar. The company's stock had taken a small but noticeable dip. He was home even less than before, and when he was distracted, his mind clearly on the battles he was fighting in the boardrooms and through his lawyers. I felt myself retreating, the old insecurities rushing back in. I was the irregular variable in his perfect equation. The liability. The charity case. The gossip columnists were right, I thought in my darkest moments. What was I doing here? The breaking point, the moment the crisis truly detonated, came a week after the article was published. Alistair came home late, his face pale and grim. He looked utterly defeated. He found me in the living room, folding laundry, the simple domestic act a stark contrast to the storm raging around us. He didn't speak for a long time. He just stood there, looking at me with a profound sadness in his eyes. "They gave me an ultimatum," he said finally, his voice hoarse. The board, led by Davies, I stopped folding, my hands frozen on a small t-shirt of Leo's. I knew what was coming. I could feel it in the cold dread that was spreading through my veins. "They invoked the morality clause in my contract," he continued, his gaze fixed on some point over my shoulder. "They said my unstable personal life and questionable judgment are a material threat to the company's reputation and shareholder value." He took a deep breath. I have to end this. You and Leo will have to leave. They want you gone by the end of the week." The words hit me with the force of a physical blow. I couldn't breathe. It was happening again. I was being dismissed, erased. "Alistair," I started, my voice breaking. He immediately held up a hand, and the gesture was like a wall between us. "It's not what you think, Alara. This isn't what I want. This is for your protection. I've arranged everything. A beautiful apartment downtown, fully furnished. I've set up a trust for Leo's education. You will never have to worry about money again. You'll be safe. They won't be able to touch you or slander you anymore." He was talking about solutions, about logistics, about money. He was trying to solve this problem the only way he knew how, by throwing his immense resources at it. But he wasn't listening to the sound of my heart breaking. He was pushing me away, packaging me up and setting me aside so he could go back to his real life, the one where I didn't fit. "So that's it," I said, my voice trembling with a mixture of grief and anger. "You just pay me off? You hide me away in a nice apartment so the board is happy and your stock price goes back up?" "It's not like that," he insisted, but his voice lacked conviction. He couldn't look me in the eye. "This is the only way to keep you from being torn apart by this, or is it the only way to keep yourself from being torn apart?" I shot back, the tears I had been holding back finally spilling down my cheeks. "I thought what we had was real. I thought you were changing. But the moment things get difficult, the moment you have to choose, you choose the company. You choose the power. You're pushing me and my son out, just like you pushed out that young man in the boardroom, just like you fire anyone who becomes an inconvenience. That's not fair," he said, his own voice rising. "Isn't it?" I cried. "I don't want your money, Alistair. I don't want a trust fund or a fancy apartment. I thought I had a home. I thought we were building a family. But I was just a project, wasn't I? The stray you took in. And now, you're putting me back out on the street, a nicer street, this time, but still. You're still choosing to let me go." He had no answer. The granite mask was back, his face unreadable, his emotions locked away. He had retreated to the fortress of his old self, where control was paramount and vulnerability was a fatal weakness. He believed he was protecting me, but what he was truly protecting was himself from the pain of fighting for me, from the risk of losing everything for me. I couldn't bear to look at him anymore. "I'll pack our things," I said, my voice hollow and dead. "We'll be gone in the morning." I turned and walked away, leaving him standing alone in the middle of the vast, silent living room. The home we had briefly created together had shattered back into a glass box, and I was on the outside again, looking in. I packed with a numb, mechanical efficiency. Each of Leo's toys, each of my own meager possessions, felt like a stone I was placing on my own chest. Leo was asleep, oblivious to the fact that his world was about to be upended for the second time in as many months. I wrote a short, formal note for Alistair, placing the key card to the penthouse on top of it on the kitchen counter. I refused his apartment, his money, his guilt-ridden settlement. We would make it on our own. We always had. Before the sun rose, I woke Leo, telling him our adventure in the Sky Castle was over. He was sleepy and confused, but he trusted me. I carried him down in the service elevator, a ghost slipping out of the machine for the last time. As the taxi pulled away from the glittering tower, I didn't look back. We ended up in a small, clean motel room across town, paid for with the last of the salary Alistair had deposited into my account. It felt like blood money, but I had no choice. For the next 2 days, I existed in a fog of grief. I went through the motions for Leo, playing games, reading stories, taking him to a local park, but inside, I was hollowed out. The hope that had bloomed within me had been ripped out by the roots, and the emptiness it left behind was vast and aching. Alistair tried to call. His name flashed on my phone screen a dozen times, but I couldn't answer. What was there to say? He had made his choice. He had chosen his kingdom over me. On the third day, I was sitting on the edge of the stiff motel bed, scrolling through job listings on my phone, when Leo pointed to the small television mounted on the wall. "Mama, look. It's Mr. Sterling." My head snapped up. There he was, on a national news channel, standing at a podium in front of a backdrop bearing the Sterling Corporation logo. He was in the middle of a press conference. He looked terrible. His face was drawn, his eyes shadowed, and for the first time, he looked his age. He looked tired and broken. A reporter was asking a question. "Mr. Sterling, rumors are swirling about a vote of no confidence from your board, citing personal instability. Can you comment on your relationship with former employee Alara Vance?" My breath hitched. This was it. The public denial. The final, humiliating erasure. Alistair stepped closer to the microphone. The room was silent. He looked directly into the camera, and it felt as if he were looking right at me. "For the past week," he began, his voice low but steady, "I have been engaged in a battle for the future of my company. But I've come to realize I was fighting the wrong battle." He paused, taking a deep breath. "The board has concerns about my judgment. Let me tell you about my judgment. My judgment was to fire a woman for having the courage to speak up against an injustice. An act of integrity that I, in my arrogance, punished. My judgment was to then find that same woman and her 6-year-old son homeless, a direct result of my actions. My judgment was to offer them a place in my home, a transactional arrangement that I thought would clear my conscience." My hand flew to my mouth. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. He was laying it all bare for the world to see. But something happened that my judgment could never have predicted. He continued, his voice growing stronger, laced with an emotion he made no effort to hide. "That woman, Alara Vance, and her son, Leo, didn't just move into my apartment. They moved into my life. They filled a silence I didn't even know was deafening. She taught me about kindness, about courage, about what it means to build a home not with money and steel, but with warmth and love. She and her son saved me from the empty, gilded cage I had built for myself." Tears were streaming down my face now, hot and unstoppable. "The board gave me an ultimatum," he said, his eyes hard as flint. "Choose the company or choose her. They believe she is a liability. They are wrong. She is the single greatest asset I have ever encountered. And my greatest failure of judgment was pushing her away to protect the very things that are meaningless without her." He looked away from the camera, as if scanning the room, then back again. "So, to the board, I say this: you can have the company. You can have the title. I am taking an indefinite leave of absence, effective immediately. My priority is no longer my stock price. My priority is finding the family I was too foolish and too cowardly to fight for." He finished with a message that was clearly not for the press. "Alara, if you can hear me, I was wrong. Pushing you away was the most cowardly thing I have ever done. I don't want to protect you from a distance. I want to stand beside you. I love you. Please, come home." Then he simply turned and walked off the stage, leaving a stunned room of reporters shouting questions behind him. I was sobbing, my whole body shaking with the force of my emotions. Leo wrapped his small arms around my neck. "Why are you crying, Mama? Is Mr. Sterling sad?" "They're happy tears, baby," I choked out. "They're happy tears." A knock on the motel room door made me jump. I wiped my eyes, my heart pounding a frantic rhythm. I opened the door, and there he was. He was still in his suit, his tie loosened, his hair slightly disheveled. His gray eyes were filled with a desperate, pleading hope. We just stood there for a moment, the whole world shrinking to the space of that dingy motel doorway. "I meant every word," he said, his voice thick with emotion. I couldn't speak. I just launched myself into his arms, burying my face in his chest, my tears soaking his expensive shirt. He wrapped his arms around me, holding me so tightly it felt like he was trying to merge our two bodies into one, to never let me go again. "I love you," I whispered into his shirt. "I was so scared, I know," he murmured into my hair, his own voice breaking. "I'm the one who should have been scared. I almost lost everything that matters." Leo peeked out from behind my legs. "Are you coming back to the Sky Castle with us, Mr. Sterling?" Alistair knelt, so he was on eye level with my son. A real, genuine smile transformed his face, erasing the last of the harsh lines. "My name is Alistair," he said gently, "and I'm going wherever you and your mom will let me go. Because you too, you're my home." The aftermath of Alistair's public declaration was a media firestorm, but not the one the board had anticipated. The narrative they had tried to create, of a reckless CEO and a gold-digging single mother, was shattered. In its place was a story of redemption, of a powerful man choosing love over money. Public opinion swelled, surprisingly, in Alistair's favor. He was humanized, seen not as a corporate machine, but as a man who had made a profound, personal stand. The board, faced with a PR nightmare and a wave of shareholder support for the man they had tried to oust, was forced into a humiliating retreat. Philip Davies resigned. They issued a public statement welcoming Alistair back whenever he chose to return. But Alistair wasn't interested in returning to that life, not in the same way. He had meant what he said. We were his priority. We went back to the penthouse, but it was different this time. It wasn't his space that we were occupying, it was our home. The silence was gone, replaced by the sound of Leo's laughter echoing through the halls, the murmur of our conversations late into the night, the soft music we played while we cooked dinner together. I was no longer the household manager. I was his partner. We were a team. I helped him navigate the complex corporate landscape from a distance, offering a perspective he had never considered. My insights, born from a life of practicality and empathy, proved surprisingly valuable. He listened to me, valued my opinion, not as an employee, but as an equal. The sterile, minimalist apartment began to transform. We bought a ridiculously comfortable, oversized sofa. We covered the pristine white walls with Leo's colorful drawings. We filled the shelves of the library with children's books and novels we were actually reading. We made that glass box a home, filling it with the beautiful, messy clutter of a real life being lived. Alistair's transformation was the most profound change of all. The guarded, cold man I had first met was gone. In his place was a man who laughed easily, who wasn't afraid to be silly to make Leo giggle, who held my hand in the park without a thought for who might be watching. He started a foundation to help single parents facing homelessness, using his resources and influence to create tangible change, turning the pain of our past into a promise for others' futures. He also started the formal process of adopting Leo. It was a long, complicated journey, but he pursued it with a quiet, fierce determination. He wanted to be more than just Mr. Sterling or Alistair. He wanted to be a father, in every sense of the word. He attended parent-teacher conferences. He helped with homework. He taught Leo how to ride a bike on the sprawling terrace, his patient encouragement a stark contrast to the harsh criticism I had once heard him level in the boardroom. One evening, months after the press conference, the three of us were curled up together on our new sofa, watching a movie. Leo was asleep between us, his head in my lap, his feet resting on Alistair's. The city lights twinkled outside, a familiar, beautiful backdrop to our new reality. Alistair reached over, his hand covering mine. I looked at him, and the love in his eyes was so open, so unguarded, it still sometimes took my breath away. "Do you remember the first night you were here?" he asked softly, so as not to wake Leo. "I told you this was a correction of an error." I nodded, the memory of that terrifying, confusing night still vivid. "I was wrong," he said. "It wasn't a correction. It was a course correction. My life was heading straight for a cliff, and I didn't even know it. You and Leo, you didn't just stop me from going over the edge. You turned me around and showed me a completely different path." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a small, simple box. It wasn't a flashy jewelry case, but a plain, velvet one. He opened it. Inside was a simple platinum band, elegant and unadorned. "This isn't a question," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "Not yet. This is a promise. A promise that what we have is real and permanent. A promise that I will spend the rest of my life being the man that you and Leo deserve. A promise of family." Tears welled in my eyes as he slid the ring onto my finger. It was a perfect fit. I looked from the simple, beautiful ring to his face, then to the sleeping child nestled between us. All the fear, the struggle, the lonely nights, it had all led me here, to this moment of quiet, profound peace. I leaned over and kissed him, a soft, lingering kiss filled with gratitude and a love that felt as vast and as bright as the city spread out before us. We were an unlikely family, forged in a moment of defiance and born from an act of kindness. He had saved me from the street, but I, in turn, had saved him from a life of gilded isolation. We had found our home, not in a place, but in each other.